Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Post with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam, folks. I'm so excited today to be joined by Aditi Kinkhabwala, the longtime reporter for the NFL Network. She was formerly with the Wall Street Journal and with the San Antonio American Express News. Aditi, thanks so much for joining me today.
It is my pleasure to be here. Thanks for calling.
Well, for sure. Well, I want to start off with first, how have you been doing, these first couple of days of the NFL offseason? Obviously, we're dealing with the pandemic as well, but how has it been like for you to finally get away from the NFL season for a bit?
There's not really a getting away. The NFL season has turned into a 12-month proposition. So as you saw, today was Trevor Lawrence's pro day, and it's kind of this never ending. Not only was it Trevor Lawrence's pro day, but JJ Watt was released, and also Marquise Pouncey and Mike Pouncey retired. So it's just a constant churning of news at this point, and it's never really an end or a quiet period. Maybe
Well,
July.
awesome.
Maybe July is a little bit quiet.
Well, it's awesome. At least you're still entertained with your job for the months we're in the off season. I wanted to know, what's your day-to-day like during the NFL season?
During a pandemic or in general regular times, which I am so desperate to have return?
Well, let's go a little bit of both. I mean, how is it different, especially during now with the coronavirus?
Well, the last 11 months have been completely different than anything ordinarily. And quite frankly, I feel incredibly grateful to have my job. I still love my job, but it isn't all the best parts of my job are sort of missing. And so I'll start with a story about Marquise Pouncey, who retired today. One thing that I will say about him is that some of my best locker room arguments have come with Pouncey, and it's because we disagree on everything. We disagree on politics. We disagree on how far your friendship should extend. We disagree on how important it is to actually set the record straight. We disagree about how the world at large should view you. We disagree about my wanting to tell a story of how much he actually helps in the local Pittsburgh community and the work that he does with the police. But he was my friend, and I loved having these disagreements and these debates, and I loved talking, and that was missing this year because we couldn't be in a locker room and you couldn't have a conversation with anybody about anything that didn't have to do with football. All of our conversations were the same way that you and I are talking, Billy, via Zoom. And so you have these Zoom press conferences that are awkward. People don't necessarily know where to look, how to look, if they can even see the person that's asking them a question, and everybody who is covering a team or a day or a press conference is on the call at the same time. So the very personal one-on-one interactions that are related to or that are a key part of being a journalist were just missing. That piece was very, very hard. Also hard, I never went anywhere. This room that you see, my office here, this is where I did my live shots every single day other than on game day. And I have 2 little kids. I have a house that's under renovation. So all of that was happening while I was sitting here trying to do television. And it's hard to not ever get out of the house. The separation between, okay, this is my work life and this is my home life doesn't exist anymore because now your home life is your work life. And game days, I wasn't on the field anymore. I had to stay in the operational zone, which is the first 10 rows. And that piece is a little bit different too, because the excitement, the fun, the adrenaline of being on the field, of hearing the crowd, of running into coaches who are doing laps before they begin, of running onto the field to ask a player, hey, are you going to play or not? All of that was gone. So obviously the day-to-day of this past year were very, very different. And I pray and I hope that we can get this under control, get to a herd immunity point such that this coming fall is like we are all familiar with, or, the parts of my job, again, that I love. I hope that those all return.
Well, it's great to see an Indian American like you in an important platform like this. I wanted to ask you, when did you first know you wanted to work in sports? And while you were in that process, did it ever dawn on you that there weren't many Indian Americans, if any, in that position that you wanted to aspire to?
It was something that I sort of fell into, that I was just going to do for a year or two before I went to law school. As you said, the sports editor of the San Antonio Express News had reached out to me when I was a senior in college and said, hey, I've got this great job. I think you should apply. And I'd always written, all my internships had been in sports media. And I just figured it was a nice break before law school. And I also thought it would make my mother go a little nuts that, her New York born, New Jersey bred, Ivy League educated daughter was going to move to Texas to cover high school football. So I did it on a lark and figured I'll do this for 1 year and then go to a law school. But I fell in love with the idea of telling stories, with every single day being different, with constantly meeting new people. And my dad took a good, I don't know, 6, 7 years of asking me, so when are you going to law school? When are you going to law school? I think he stopped asking me when I was at the Wall Street Journal. And when you ask about doing something different, I was actually just telling this story earlier today. My mother once said to me, I go to all these parties and everybody's kids, all her friends' kids were doctors or engineers, or they worked at hedge funds and Wall Street. And she said, and my daughter is a newspaper writer, which, like the subtext of that was, these people are making so much money and you're a newspaper writer making $30,000 a year. And I remember saying to her, Mom, this is where you are proud that you have raised a child to go and chase something that is completely different than what anybody else is doing, and that has the courage and confidence to go her own way. And so my mom was like, okay. You could see that she's like, all right, I'll spin it that way. I'll spin it that way. But then when I was at the Wall Street Journal, she actually was indeed very, very proud. I don't know how she felt about the move to the NFL Network. I think that she didn't get it on her cable package at the time, so she wasn't so convinced that that was great. But now she certainly feels a lot prouder and is excited about it. And yes, I am certainly very aware of the fact that there are not many Indian American women doing what I am doing. I don't believe that there are any Indian American women on national sports television. There are men like Kevin Nagandi, who's been a great mentor and friend, like Anish Shroff, like Adam Amin, seeing them succeed. Not that Adam is Indian, but South Asian. That certainly is nice to see. It's good to see the breaking of barriers. And again, I think that the more you see different faces, the more accustomed and comfortable you are in seeing them. When I first started on television, I was very expressly told, television executives are not used to seeing somebody that looks like you. So just keep working and prove that you belong, and eventually they'll get over it.
And have you been able to talk to other Indian American women, like, ladies in college right now, growing up? I mean, have you been able to kind of serve as a mentor to them, talk to them, hopefully encourage them to follow their dreams?
Billy, the same way that you message me out of nowhere, I do my best to try to talk to whoever will reach out to me. And I have to be very honest that, my email is flooded. And again, I do my best. I can't say that I have gotten back to everybody that I should have. I hope that I have, but I hate to be the person that says I always do. I certainly try. And there are indeed Indian American women in sports journalism that I feel a kinship with, that I try to maintain a friendship with, or that I seek out, because this is a very interesting world, and it's an isolating world. Just being a woman of color, and then being an Indian American woman certainly adds a different layer to that.
What do you think we can do to fix kind of the stereotypes in our own community? Because I feel like oftentimes these stereotypes about, Indians, we only do, STEM related majors or math or engineering, really comes from people in our own community kind of saying that that's kind of the way it is since we've been growing up. I mean, how do you think we can change the culture within our own community to encourage people who want to be like you to pursue these passions like sports?
I think a lot of that is just exposure, right? You now have an Indian American coordinator in Sean Desai. You have a position coach in Sanjay Lal. You see the way that Shad Khan is hiring in Jacksonville and who some of his executives are. I think a lot of it is opportunity, making the most of those opportunities. And then, of course, it's just exposure and seeing that it really isn't that crazy. I think that people are always familiar with what they know. And I'll tell a story. My brother is married to a brilliant, beautiful doctor, and they have dated since they were in college, since they were freshmen in college. And my brother was at Wharton, and he was obviously studying finance and was going to go work on Wall Street. And Mona, his wife and then girlfriend, was obviously pre-med. Both of her doctors are doctors. Both of her parents are doctors. All of their friends are doctors. They lived in this doctor world. And so there was certainly a piece of Mona's father that probably thought, why is Mona not with a doctor? Because what they know are doctors. And in their mind, doctors are the most brilliant people. And then, of course, my brother, who's the most amazing, fabulous, wonderful, brilliant guy that there is, and certainly does very well financially for himself, was able to essentially show his father-in-law or his future father-in-law there are actually more professions out there that are successful and filled by brilliant people beyond just the world that you've been in. And that's the same thing that I would say to my mom, is that, my mom is a former physicist who was then a math professor. And my father is a chemical engineer. And so they knew, when you talk about STEM, that was their world. That was their whole world. I think about all of my really good family friends and my family members. There are not very many that are outside of the math and science field. And that's because that's what they knew. But with each person who goes a different route, you expose the rest of your community to what else is out there.
Do you still feel like that you face stereotypes? I mean, you've been doing this business for a long time. You've been with the NFL Network for a long time. Do you still find yourself having to face these stereotypes of, people may see you and they may not immediately think that you're a sports reporter, or has that kind of faded out as you become more of a veteran and very established in the business?
I don't know that it's about they may not see that I'm a sports writer, but sure, there are stereotypes. Sure, there's still sometimes sort of a shock value. I think there's a little bit more now of, diversity and inclusion are really hot button topics right now. And I would venture to say that true inclusion means the inclusion of all, not just one minority ethnicity or one minority race. And I think that when you have a diversity, that just means it's different. It means variety. It means not what you've always seen. And that includes all of what you haven't seen. That's all of what is different or minority, not just one. So I think that that's part of, and I don't mean that to be in any way diminishing anybody's experience at all. I just think it's important to recognize that diversity is diversity, whether it's gender, whether it's sexual orientation, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's age. I should probably end right there before I get in any sort of trouble.
For sure. I was curious, on a more lighthearted note, do you consume Indian food a lot? I mean, do you watch Bollywood movies? Is that something you enjoy? I mean, what are some of your favorites?
I do not watch Bollywood movies, but I love Indian food. Both of my children love Indian food. Actually, I would venture to say that my husband does too. He only doesn't like Indian sweets. Other than that, he likes Indian food. And both of my kids, my daughter is 16 months old and my son is 5. They can both eat extremely spicy food. They love Gujarati food. And I definitely choose Indian food over just about anything else.
That's awesome.
Which is funny because as a child growing up, I hated Indian food. And I always preferred the day that we got pizza or my mom made Mexican food. Indian food was not my choice.
Yeah, for sure. That's something too. I ask my mom sometimes to maybe diversify her cooking, but definitely loved the Indian food when I was at college as well.
Exactly.
I was wondering, when you travel in the NFL, what are some of your favorite stadiums to visit, whether it's the actual stadium, the atmosphere, or just some of the cities you get to enjoy and visit?
Gosh, well, this year was very difficult, obviously, because we traveled, but you were stuck in your hotel room. I love the fans in Cleveland. I just think that they've got an unbelievable amount of passion and that they have been through so much and have stayed loyal to their team. And Cleveland's a fun city to go to. There's a very underrated restaurant scene there. I love Nashville just as a city to visit. There's not really a bad NFL city. I'm trying to sit here and think, what's a road trip that I hate? There really isn't one. Even I shouldn't say even because I shouldn't say even, but Cincinnati has fun restaurants and a neat stadium that's right on the river, and there's a beautiful hotel there that I like to stay in. If I get to go east, I'm closer to my family, and I try to swing a trip of some kind. That's hard to say. There's, again, like I said, there is not an NFL city that I dislike going to. There's not a stadium that I truly despise. This may not be a very popular opinion, but I don't really necessarily love Dallas.
Oh.
Personally, I think the scoreboard is really big.
Well, I was wondering, what is it like to cover a Super Bowl? I mean, that's got to be a crazy experience. And do you ever just find yourself in the middle of that week or watching that game in person? You're like, man, how did I get here?
Not how, but there's certainly an appreciation. There's always an appreciation every time you get to step on a field and be in a place where, millions of people are watching and they don't get to step on that field. You have to be appreciative. And you also have to bear the responsibility of that. I'm the eyes and ears for somebody who can't be here. I get this opportunity, and that means that there's something that I need to be able to do as a result of that. And that is share what someone can't see for him or herself.
For sure. And you, like I mentioned, covered the Wall Street Journal, I believe covering the Giants. And I was curious, did you ever think about maybe branching outside of sports? I mean, you mentioned you are
Oh,
involved with
yeah.
politics. I mean, you know what's going on. Did you ever think, man, it would be nice if I maybe stayed at the Wall Street Journal and covered the news? Or is that something like, man, I would think I could have been a good hardline news reporter?
Well, it's interesting because when I started, I covered business and I also even wrote obits and covered the police beat. Um, Actually, when I was at the Journal, I had some pretty intense conversations with my sports editor at the time. And he said that, in order to advance here, you should go be the Paris correspondent. You should go and do something like that. And had I not been with the person who is now my husband and the father of my two children, I think I probably would have jumped at that, like, why not go live abroad for a few years and just do something completely different? But where I was in my life, it just didn't necessarily fit. And I feel very fortunate because the truth of the matter is that what I do is not life or death. It's entertainment. And I'm not trying in any way to diminish my livelihood or the livelihood of the men and the women that I cover. But at the end of the day, sports is not about the future of our nation or the future of our democracy or the future of our world. It's the reach of it is really truly to keep people company in some way. And so you try to bring people insight and joy and engage them. And it's just a different responsibility.
Who are some of the funniest athletes you've covered? I mean, you get to see these guys behind closed doors. A lot of fans don't get to see them. I mean, or is even not even just funny, just some memorable interactions. You mentioned the Pouncey brothers. Man, these guys, people should know these are really cool guys behind closed doors, but off the
Billy,
field.
you know what? I hate to do this, but I hate being asked that question. It is so hard. It's like when people say, "Who's your favorite?" You can't ask me who my favorite kid is. There are so many great guys that I have dealt with, men and women. Look, there are women that I covered. I covered a Rutgers women's basketball team that will always be close to my heart. They went to the national title game, and then a radio host lambasted them in the worst possible of ways, and the way that they stood up with grace and class will always be something that sticks with me. Women and men, both. It's stories. It's about people. It's who do you connect with on a personal level in some way, and a lot of it has to do with timing and why you connect. I can think of athletes that when I was pregnant, their wives were pregnant and we bonded over that and never would have otherwise. So it's hard to pinpoint or to ever pick one. I'm sorry. And I've been doing this now for 2 decades. My God, that ages me. I've been doing this for 2 decades. That's too long of a time to just come up with one or two.
Well, how about this then? I mean, because you mentioned you've been doing this for a long time, 2 decades. I mean, where do you see yourself in 10 years? I mean, I know 2020 by itself felt like 10 years, but you've been at the NFL Network for a long time. You've developed so many great relationships in the National Football League. Are you content where you are? Would you like to maybe try something else in 10 years? Or you say, I'm pretty content with how my career has panned out.
Savages are content. I think you always need to grow. You always need to look for another challenge, at least for me, not always, not everybody, but for me, I like the idea of new opportunities, new challenges, and I would not be unhappy covering the NFL 10 years from now, but I hope I'm doing things that are maybe a little bit different or a little bit more than what I am doing right now.
And how do you handle the social media aspect of it? I mean, you have a following on social media, covering the NFL. People really want to hear what do you say. You also have some lunatics out there who can tweet whatever they want at you. You probably have gotten mean tweets. I mean, how do you handle that whole dynamic of social media that has brought in so much more access to the fans and given you a platform? But you also have to sometimes deal with these crazies out there.
For sure, and it's not easy, and you're right, because I think that engagement is a big part of it, and I do my best to engage with people, and I read my mentions, and I shouldn't always, because sometimes there are a lot of trolls and nastiness out there. Some of them have to do with my ethnicity. Some of them, I had a guy once tweet at me, "What happened to the dot on your forehead? Did it freeze and fall off?" And that was because he was pissed about the Steelers having lost. I've had people mock my children. So I think that there are a lot of keyboard cowboys out there, and we need to acknowledge and accept that. I wish that it didn't affect me personally. It does bother me for sure. Meanness bothers me, but I also think it's a way to stay engaged and connect with people. And, I have Twitter friends, people that I've met on Twitter and never met in real life, or met via email and never met in real life. So it's a part of what our world is right now.
What's your advice to people trying to make it in this pandemic? I mean, you know better than anyone, it's already a competitive field, and now you have to deal with the realities of this pandemic. So, what's your advice to young men and women who are trying to become sportscasters, sports writers in the field of sports, trying to make it while having to deal with the realities of the coronavirus?
I think you have to just find a way to distinguish yourself. What makes you unique? What is one thing that you do that nobody else is offering? Find your niche, find your uniqueness and play that up and hustle, hustle, hustle. The same way, Billy, that you are not afraid to email me out of the blue and keep at me and ask me to do this. That's what you have to do. You have to be unafraid. And there will be rejection, and there will be people who say, no, sorry, I'm busy, or people who ignore you or whatever, but you have to just keep at it and be fearless.
For sure. My final question for you, Aditi, I mean, you've been so gracious with your time, is going back to being an Indian American in this position. I mean, is that something you think about, the fact that you are a role model for so many people? I mean, you mentioned you're the only Indian American woman that I know of on national sports television. I mean, is that something that you carry with you, or is that something that you more try to be the best reporter you can be, and you're just an Indian American woman as a part of that?
Well, it's certainly, the big piece of it, Billy, is yes, it's more about being identified first as a good reporter. It shouldn't matter whether I'm a woman or have brown skin or I'm a mother or whatever that is. The first thing that you should say is, this is a really good reporter, and this is a person who is credible, and this is a person who tells the story, and this is somebody who is of integrity and that I can count on. But certainly, I am very conscious of my ethnicity and my heritage, and the door that I have tried to open and say, hey, people can indeed look different on sports television, that we don't all have to look the same. And that when you look outside the box, you might find someone who can really fill what you're looking for. And I am aware of that. And every time I hear from somebody who tells me that it is meaningful to them, it counts for something.
Well, Aditi, this has been such a pleasure talking to you, talking about your career, all the great stories you have during your time in sports. Thank you so much for joining me today. I can't say how much I appreciate it.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
That's Aditi Kinkhabwala, the beat reporter for the NFL Network. She's been all over the map with the Wall Street Journal and in San Antonio. This has been the latest edition of the Post with BP. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. I'm Billy Parvatam. We'll see you next time.